Hi, my name is Dr. Michelle Meganberg, and I am so excited. I have this wonderful author. I'm going to show you her book. It's called The Girl in the Red Boots, Making Peace with My Mother. And Dr. Rabinor is going to be speaking to you about, what inspired her to write this book. And I am so excited because this is so timely, with Mother's Day coming up next weekend. And this is obviously about her mother. We could just gain so much wisdom and knowledge. And I am excited to kind of probe her a little bit about her experience. So without further ado, if you could explain a little bit about who you are and the work you do so that the audience could get to know you, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. So I'm Judy Rabinor, Dr. Judy Rabinor. I've been a psychologist for many decades. And my background is in the field of eating disorders. The very first patient referred to me when I got my PhD developed an eating disorder, and that's back in the 70s, and when no one knew much about eating disorders. And I became interested in the mother-daughter relationship because at that time, and really continuing to today, it is predominantly mothers who bring their daughters to therapist's office. And I wound up doing a lot of counseling of mothers and daughters. So that's how I got into mothers and daughters. But of course, that's only the front story. The back story is I had my own complicated relationship with my own mother. And I'll tell you how the book opens because it's very critical to why I wrote the book. I was giving a workshop, and I was giving a workshop on the mother-daughter relationship. And ordinarily, I do a lot of meditative exercises, and I would introduce myself. I am Judy, daughter of Peggy. And that's my mother's name. And at that moment, instead of the image that I wanted to jump into my mind, which was my mother, who was captain of the cheerleaders, what jumped into my mind was I am sitting in the back of the car and I'm 8 years old. And my mother is taking me to my cousin Winnie's birthday party. And I'm all dressed up in a nice new dress that she had bought me. But instead of going to cousin Winnie's birthday party, we went to the hospital and I had my tonsils taken out. And I still can either remember the scene or remember a memory that's been etched in my brain of me being wheeled down this hospital corridor on a gurney, and I'm screaming and my mother is waving from the other end. And so this memory popped into my mind and I realized, oh my goodness, here I am, a therapist helping mothers and daughters, and I have my own unhealed wound. I think I better do some work on myself. And I did. And in uncovering many things from my past, I began reassessing, reappraising the story of me and my mother. And that's how I came to write this book. I did not write this book. I started it 8 years ago when she passed away at 93. And it has taken me 8 years to put this together. But it's been a journey of mourning. It's been a ritual of mourning. I feel like I've kept my mother with me as I've written these stories of her life and my life and our relationship. And so that's what I want to say, just to open up the conversation.
Any sense, because you mentioned kind of earmarking those 8 years, any sense why it took you that extended period of time
To write the book?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, because I had written 2 other books, but writing a memoir is different. I had written 2 nonfiction books, and in a nonfiction book, you can stand outside more. But this was really all about me. Also, what I didn't say is this book, I started writing this book in 1983. Okay, flashback to 1983. 1983, I'm getting divorced. And my mother-in-law, who is the mother of none other than the man I'm getting divorced from, comes over, and she's so sorry because we had a great relationship, and she started talking to me about the man that she's about to marry. She is about to get remarried and I am about to get divorced. And she tells me these hilarious stories about being single, sort of to pep me up. And I go to a writing class and I start writing about her. I start writing about her. The name of that book, which is unfinished and is in my computer, is called Between Marriages. Anyway, 3 classes in, I stop writing about my mother-in-law and I start writing about my mother. And some of the stories I wrote in the 80s I have carted them around from computer to computer, stacks of yellow paper, printouts. They've been with me for all these years. So it's very, for me, a writer, it's very rewarding to write the stories of your life. Now I know you and I are both therapists, but I also teach writing groups.
Mm.
And I love teaching writing groups. And for some people, writing is just as therapeutic as talking.
Absolutely. Creative arts is an incredible way to express yourself.
And to dig down deep. And the other thing about writing is writing forces us to slow down.
Mm.
And we live in such a fast-paced world, and everything is always moving from thing to thing, and phones ringing and ding dong. But when I write, I sort of give myself permission to turn everything else off. And that's one reason I really love writing. And it's why I think I'm able to dig down deep when I write.
Yeah. So in your writing this memoir, which sounds like it was a really, journey for you,
Journey.
a long and extensive one. What, if we had to, I guess, focus on like the main lessons that came out of it, or, really, strong sentiments, that stuck with you, that you're taking in your journey throughout your life.
Right.
Anything, in regards to this exploration with you and your mother that was momentous for you?
Yes, of course. Yes, that's why it took so long. And that's another thing, that many people start writing a memoir. And as what happened to me is, it changed as I wrote it. My own understanding of my own story shifted. And I would say I began writing this with the bad mommy stories in predominance. She
Mm.
did this and she did that. And how could she have done this? And how could she have done that? But what happened as I went along is I started seeing a different picture. And for example, right in the beginning of the book, I write, my mother was born in 1918, 2 years before women got the right to vote. And I remember writing that sentence and thinking, this is a fact I've known since I was a kid, but I digested it differently. And I thought about, what would it be like to be born in the era before women had the right to vote? And the powerlessness of women of that generation really, it was like a wake-up call. I really thought about, her life was not like what my life was like. And the fact that, so the story of the tonsils is, my mother told me the reason she did this is the doctor told her to do this. Now, if a doctor told you to do something that didn't make perfect sense to you, what would we do in this day and age? We would go run home to our computers and check everything on the internet. But there was no internet, and it was a different era where people really did listen to doctors. They were the authority, and a little woman who couldn't vote, couldn't get a credit card in her own name. When I was proofreading this book and I read the 1918 year, I started thinking about things, and I thought, I wonder when I got my own credit card in my own name. And you know what I read and remembered? I remembered that I was a teacher and my ex-husband was a student, and the credit card said Mrs. Arnold Rabinor, because the credit card was in his name, even though I was earning the money.
Wow. Wow.
Women could not get credit cards until, I think, the 70s.
Really? I see.
In their own name, in their own name.
Amazing.
And I know we don't even think about these things and what the difference it makes to have your own money, to earn money, to have the right to vote. And that's just a metaphor for all different kinds of freedoms, right? So yeah, things shifted as I wrote and as I thought about my mother's life. And I understood that she really didn't have many of the advantages that I had. And then, do you want to say anything, or should I continue?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm just even listening to you, and it's resonating so much with me personally, because I shared with you a little bit before we started filming, but I come from a family where, all of my grandparents are Holocaust survivors and had extensive trauma, and recognizing the intergenerational trauma But, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about what it must have been like for my mother to have been raised, and my father, with Holocaust survivors, two who were in concentration camps and saw their entire families being murdered, and another one who was hidden and had her own extensive, both of them, extensive trauma. So all of a sudden, as I'm sitting here, I'm feeling compassionate, like deep compassion. So even just listening to you without even, going into the book, it really resonated with me as you're speaking.
Well, that's amazing. Because yeah, I've dealt, I know so many people who are children or grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. And right, you can't imagine what it would be like to see your entire family wiped out. And then have to move, then have no money, no identity, no nothing, and then just move to the United States where you don't speak English as a start.
Yes.
And then your mother was raised by those people, right?
Yeah.
They had to be tough or they wouldn't have survived. That's the first thing that comes to our mind, right?
Oh, yeah.
So then not only did I understand things about my mother, but as I looked more carefully at my own life, I mean, some famous writer once said, write what you're ashamed of. And one of the mentors that I had encouraged me to write more about my father, and I did. And there's a scene in this book where my father is dying. He has cancer and he's dying. He's 54 years old. And the doctor had told us, do not tell your father he's terminal. When we tell people they're terminal, they give up. So I was already a grown woman, my brother too, my mother, we just went along with this.
Yes.
And I wrote a scene where my father is saying, what's going on here? He's hooked up to an oxygen machine. His body is withering away because he is eating, but he's not gaining weight. And he says, I'm not getting better. And we all say to him, no, you're getting better, Dad. You're getting better. And I think, and I've been carrying this grudge against my mother for my whole life. And look what I did. I also blindly followed a doctor's order. So, I mean, I think I began to realize that some of the different ways that I was very angry at my mother, that there were parallels in my own life, and that I had done things that I didn't feel that proud of. And I think I told you this before the show. It bothered me that my mother would never, I felt she never would sincerely apologize. That's only one. I mean, I'm just not giving the whole book away. But I feel like women of her generation grew up with the belief that secrets were fine, white lies were fine, and a lot of things qualified for a white lie. But when I think about it, I've had my own white lies, and sometimes white lies are okay. But my mother was not reflective. And this bothered me beyond belief, that she wouldn't really think about these things. She would just say to me, you're fine. Look at you. I mean, so these things happened, but you're fine, aren't you? You look fine to me. And she had that need to say, I'm fine, you're fine, we're fine, let's go on. Get in the car, let's go shopping. We're fine. And she didn't come from a generation where people talked about their feelings.
Yeah, it still exists today.
I know.
Still that stigma. So, Mother's Day is coming up, which is usually fraught with a lot of feelings for many people.
Right.
And you go to the store and you look at all the beautiful Hallmark cards, and they're all saying, I love you from the depths of my soul. And, right. And some people report to me, patients that I see, like, I can't even buy a card for my mother because it doesn't.
Michelle, me too. People come in and they say, I stood in the store for 25 minutes and I left with no card. I left with no card because no card fit.
It doesn't fit. And I don't know what to do. So there's this expectation, right, that we have to have a certain relationship. There's an expectation that if we don't, we have to, forgive and forget. So I guess I just, some feedback from you, because you went on this journey, and, there are some people obviously in different stages of journeys, right? There are some people who are avoidant of the journey. There are some people who dive right into the journey. And there are some who have a little bit of a pinky toe inside. So, maybe to just give, for this upcoming, Mother's Day, any wisdom that you have about how to deal with it if you're kind of, maybe in the, contemplative state.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that we are a nation who avoid mourning. I mean, you remember when Biden became president and he had a moment of silence for the 500,000 people who died? And I thought we should have that every day.
Mm.
I mean, every day there were times here in New York, and that's where you're broadcasting from, right? But remember how horrible it was a year ago, 800 people dying. You're afraid to leave your house. Each one of those 800 people a day touched a world of relatives and family. It was just horrible. And yet we just had to keep plodding on. So I would say that what we need to do when we've lost something is grieve. We need to grieve, we need to mourn, and we need to face our feelings that I don't have something I really wish I did have. If your mother died when you were a child, that's a big loss. It's one of the biggest losses. If you have a mother who is alive, but you feel she's so complicated that you have to really set rigid boundaries to prevent her from damaging you or your children, that's a loss. We watch television and we think, oh, isn't this fun? 3 generations in the kitchen. Well, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it's better 3 generations in a restaurant, go, leave, and be done with the whole thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So the first thing is grieve. And the second thing is, I think the end of all therapy is we learn to take care of ourselves. Eventually, we lose our mothers and we have to learn how to mother ourselves. And we have to ask ourselves, if this is going to be a hard day for me, what do I need to do? What would be the best thing I could do? Should I walk on the beach? Can I play tennis? Should I stay home and read a book? Should I stay in bed all day? Should I call up a friend if I'm a single person without a parent or a child? Well, should I call up a friend? Everything is starting to open up again. Yeah.
And I think you're talking about self-care and self-preservation,
I am.
right?
Yeah.
And self-compassion, which is huge, right? We don't really show ourselves much compassion. Which I love what you're saying is that no matter where you're at, right, in the state, in that stage, to grieve whatever loss it is, whether it's, right, a minute one or a substantial one. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, there are many people out there who have parents who are very ill. And that's another very sad stage of life. My mother struggled with Parkinson's and dementia for the last 10 years of her life. So she was here, but she was not here. And, that kind of ambiguous loss where my real mother wasn't there. I'm a big journal writer, and I found an entry. This is the 2nd year in a row my mother forgot my birthday. Well, she would never have forgotten my birthday, but she had dementia. That's a loss.
Yeah.
So we have to, exactly what you're saying. And I know you are a big proponent of meditation and self-care. We have to figure out how to take care of ourselves and how to quiet down and just be with what we can't change, right?
Yes, and I think what we're always up against, which is why mindfulness and meditative practices and contemplative practices are so important, is, our mind is constantly telling us to avoid and distract from any kind of discomfort, right? So it really takes intention, being intentional about it.
Intentional, yeah, that's
Right.
exactly right.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom. And I have to say that it inspired me so much just listening to you. And like I said, it really resonated with me. And I'm almost thinking to myself, right? Because who doesn't hold grudges? Because we all do.
Right.
But, just like I'm inspired to take this journey. I have to be honest.
I can't wait till you read the book. You have to contact me after you read it, after you finish it.
I read parts of it, but I really want to sit with it and I really want to dive into it and absorb
it. Yeah.
So I so appreciate it. And I think the other thing which I want to say that really inspired me about, you writing this is often there's a lot of shame attached to these types of relationships because of the social stigmas. And the fact that you're putting it out there and you're giving it a voice and you're allowing people to say, you know, it's really normalizing it and universalizing it and saying it's okay to have these difficult relationships. It's okay to take the journey, and it's okay to be in your process and grieve the way you need to. So I really want to thank you for that, you
And I
know.
really want to thank you for noticing that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's so nice to meet you. Is there anything else you want to say about yourself in terms of where could they find the book?
Yeah, well, anybody can go to my website. It's Judith Ruskay Rabinor, PhD.com. And the book is available on my website, on Amazon. And if you're interested in taking a writing class, that's on my website also. So there you go.
Are you giving any writing courses relative to taking this journey? In other words,
I am. I'm giving one at the JCC next week. So
wow.
I'm giving one at the JCC in Manhattan next week, and I'm giving one on Mother's Day. And the information about all of these is listed on my website.
Perfect. So I'm going to encourage everybody to consider taking the workshop. I don't know how full it is at this point. And to really go out and buy this book, because it is, like I said, I've read snippets of it. I'm going to really sit and dive into it, especially after this conversation, because you've really inspired me. But I thank you so much for your time and, you know, for sharing this with everybody. Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Michelle. And it's been great talking to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Me too.